Hey, fifth grade, here is a read aloud for you. Although this looks like a short children's book, which it kind of is, I guess, but there's a lot of stuff in it. It is a fifth grade level book, and it is worth half an AR point, but hey, every half point counts, right? So after this, definitely log into Renaissance and take the quiz, because it'll help you out and bump up your word count for the reading month. There's a Hair in My Dirt, a Worm Story by Gary Larson. Beneath the floor of a very old forest, nestled in among some nice, rich topsoil, lived a family of worms, earthworms to be exact. One evening, the three of them, mother, father, and their little worm son, sat down to their usual dinner, dirt. They had just begun to dine when the little worm, staring wide-eyed at his meal, suddenly spit out his food and screamed, "There's a hair in my dirt! There's a hair in my dirt!" And sure enough, there it was, plain as day. They could all see it. At first, the little worm was horrified, but soon after that, it gave way to being just plain mad. "I hate being a worm," he screeched, his tiny body trembling. "We're the lowest of the low, bottom of the food chain. Bird food, fish bait. What kind of life is this anyway? We never go swimming or camping or hiking or anything. Shoot, we never even go to the surface unless it rains and it floods us out. All we ever do is crawl around on the stupid ground. Oh, and how can I forget? We eat dirt. Dirt for breakfast, dirt for lunch, dirt for dinner, dirt, dirt, dirt. And look, now there's even a hair in my dirt. The final insult. I can't stand it any longer. I hate being a worm." And with that, the little worm slumped back in his chair, exhausted by his outburst. Mother Worm, an expression of concern on her face, looked from her pouting son to Father Worm. She had constantly tried to make their home as cheery as possible, even going as far as putting silverware on the table, despite the fact that none of them had arms. But Father Worm, a proud invertebrate and a learned member of the Annelida phylum, even with a small rudimentary brain, was glaring at what he considered to be an ungrateful and ignorant son. "Well, well, well," he said, breaking the awkward silence. "Let me get this straight. Not only is your mother's dirt not good enough for you, but you feel being a worm isn't exactly a charmed life, huh?" A strange glint fell across Father Worm's eye. "My boy, I think it's time I tell you a story." The little worm looked up and sneered sarcastically. "If this is the one about the teenage worms and the insane trout fishermen, I've heard that one a gazillion times." "No, no," said the Father Worm calmly. "Not that story, though that is a good story. This one is different. This story has a happy ending." "I have an idea," Mother Worm chimed in enthusiastically. "Let's listen to Father's story, and afterwards maybe we can all have some fresh, cold dirt for dessert." And so Father Worm cleared his long, primitive pharynx, took a futile puff on his dirt-filled pipe, and began his story. Once upon a time, in a forest not too far from here, lived a beautiful young maiden. Her name was Harriet, and Harriet loved the magic of nature with all its magnificent plants and animals. You're about to learn that loving nature and being knowledgeable of nature are two different things. One lovely spring morning, she decided to take a stroll along her favorite woodland trail. "What wondrous things will I see today?" Harriet thought to herself. I must say, she was excited as a tapeworm and a meat patty. With her first steps, Harriet took a deep breath and filled her lungs with fresh air. "Oh, thank you, trees and other plants," she called out. "Thank you for making the air so crisp and clean." Well, as any worm with half a ganglion knows, the plants did a little more than just make the air crisp and clean. They made the air. Every molecule of oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere was put there by a plant, and the last time I looked, the living were quite fond of oxygen. Hey, even the dead need it, or they'd hang around a lot longer and get on everyone's nerves. So you do need oxygen for things to decay properly. Soon, Harriet met a family of squirrels who came bounding toward her, unafraid and looking for a possible treat. They were gathering nuts from a nearby tree, and Harriet was quick to accommodate them. "Oh, you're all so cute," she gushed. To be sure, these furry creatures had that cute thing down. Real good, regrettably. You see, Harriet was feeding gray squirrels, a large, aggressive species that had been introduced to this forest, and were taking it over from the native red squirrels, a smaller, more timid species. So native means they were there first, like originally there. All squirrels are rodents, but in the wrong place and the wrong time, some are rats. Around the bend, the forest opened to a meadow of wild flowers as far as the eye could see. "My!" exclaimed Harriet, bedazzled. "I'm gazing at a painting. Oh, Mother Nature, what an artist you are!" Mother Nature uses bright colors, nectar, mimicry, deception, and whatever other tricks they had up their sleeve. These floral sirens were competing for the attention of pollinating insects. In a field of flowers, all is fair in bugs and war. A little ways farther, Harriet happened to look down and saw a column of ants crossing the trail. "Ah," she smiled, noticing all the eggs they were carrying. "Even the littlest creatures take good care of their babies. How adorable!" Adorable? Well, as Grandpa Worm used to say, about as adorable as a nest of baby robins. These were Amazon ants, a species that, despite its name, lives in many parts of the world and specializes in the enslavement of other species, and Harriet was watching a raiding party turning home with their living booty. Author's note: although most slave ants spend their lives toiling away, getting up early to milk the a few escape by fate by doting on the queen. As the trail widened and the trees thinned out, Harriet heard a rumbling sound. Looking around, she spied a familiar truck heading her way. She immediately recognized the ruggedly handsome and rosy-cheeked character behind the wheel. "Hello, Lumberjack Bob," she called, waving with happy excitement, knowing him to be a gentleman with a quick smile and a big heart. Well, kind, big-hearted, and rosy-cheeked he might be, the latter caused by expanded capillaries in his skin's dermal layer. But Lumberjack Bob was really just a regular guy with an education doing the one job he knew how to do, cutting down ancient trees that were here long before the first intestinal worms came over in the Pilgrims. Harriet then heard a magical sound from the canopy of trees above. "Oh," she cried skyward, "listen to the songs of those happy, happy birds." Well, if those birds were happy, may the garden gods cut me in half with a rusty shovel. Birds sing to communicate, and what they were communicating was mostly an array of insults, warnings, and warnings to members of their own species. In fact, all baby birds are taught by their parents not to even smile, or their beaks will crack. "This story's for the birds, if you ask me," the little worm interrupted suddenly. "Some lady walking in the woods. Oh, I can't stand the excitement. If you have to tell me a story, could it be at least one that's kind of exciting? Like Mr. Dung Beetle finds his field of dreams? Now that's a cool story." "I'm telling you this story," said Father Worm rather testily. "So just put a fishhook in your mouth and in that mouth of yours and let me finish. Now, where was I? Oh, yes." In the distance, Harriet noticed some movement at the far side of the meadow. "Fawns!" she happily exclaimed, as she watched them take turns chase one another and frolic while their mother gazed. She mused out loud. "Yes, little ones, go ahead and play your silly games. Soon you'll be grown up and have to say goodbye to such carefree antics." Silly games? Carefree antics? Leech livers! As young animals play, they literally become smarter, just like you, as extra neurons are formed in their brains. And of course, smarter deer have a better chance of survival than the dumber ones. You know, Bambi's mom never played much as a kid, and you all know what happened to her. Around the next bend, the path skirted a lovely pond, and Harriet was elated to see a slow-moving, lumpy creature just in front of her. "Mr. Turtle!" she squealed excitedly, scooping up the startled reptile, and then with a sympathetic smile, she added, "What are you doing out of your pond, Mr. Turtle? Well, I think I'll just send you right back home." So Harriet wound up and hurled the bewildered animal into the middle of the marsh, where it landed with a loud and satisfying kerplunk. Well, unfortunately, Mr. Turtle was not a turtle at all, but a tortoise. And, well, turtles are well adapted for aquatic life. Their land-dwelling cousins never evolved into decent dog paddlers. So that's a fancy way to say turtles can swim, tortoises cannot. Sadly, the little reptile sank to the bottom, where it promptly drowned. Even worse, who knows how many of our parasitic loved ones went down with the ship? As the middle of the pond bubbled, Harriet's eye was caught by a large and colorful insect by large and colorful insects flying just above the surface. Dragonflies, she exulted. Oh, look how they dance in the air like winged ballerinas. Winged ballerinas? Winged assassins in tutus might be closer to the truth. Dragonflies are skilled predators, and if their graceful aerobatics have anything to do with dancing, then I'm a sea monkey's uncle. Harriet thought she saw something move in the tall grass near her feet. Dropping gracefully to her knees, she almost put her hand on a small slug that was wandering by. Recoiling in disgust, she cried, "Stay away from me, you slimy thing!" And then, seeing the real object of her desire, she lunged forward and came up with her prize. "Hello, Mr. Frog," she said, laughing. "Should I kiss you and see if you turn into a prince?" Fortunately for Harriet, she didn't kiss this creature, for it wasn't Mr. Frog she was holding, but Mr. Toad. And like most toads and some frogs, this one packed a powerful, sometimes lethal, toxin in its skin. On the other hand, the slug slime was actually quite harmless, if perhaps a bit gooey. Kissing out of your species is really not recommended, son, but if you have to, always choose a gastropod over an amphibian. "Ernie Johnson," Mother Worm suddenly blurted out. "What?" Father Worm asked, finding his story interrupted for the second time. "Ernie Johnson! I went to my high school prom with the slug named Ernie Johnson." "Well, what made you fall for Dad?" the little worm asked. "He's slimy, isn't he?" "Well, not exactly," Mother Worm replied. "Your father's always been more on the sticky side." "May I please continue?" screamed Father Worm. "That is, if the two of you are done discussing the viscosity of my mucus." Releasing the frog, Harriet continued on her way. The trail soon brought her to the edge of a small river, where she saw a most remarkable sight. Large hook-nosed fish, their red scales shimmering in the sunlight, were struggling to get upstream. "Salmon!" she joyfully declared, looking for spawning grounds, I bet. Well, technically speaking, the salmon weren't looking for their spawning grounds, they were smelling them. When salmon hatch, the smell of home is branded into their brains forever, and even though they may wander in the ocean for years, their incredible noses will one day lead them right back to where their life began. Now, we earthworms have our own little miracle when it comes to breeding. Each of us contains both male and female reproductive organs, but that's a story I'll tell you when you're a little longer, son. As the trees closed in on Harriet, the forest grew darker and darker. Sensing that she was being watched, Harriet looked up into the sky. She found a pair of large, ominous eyes staring back at her. "Oh, I recognize you now, Mr. Owl." You guys will see that's not an owl. She laughed. "And fireflies!" she gleefully cried as a group of little insects suddenly swarmed around her. "They're the fairies of the night, enchanting the forest with their magical little lights." Ha! Did Harriet ever get taken by one of the oldest tricks in nature's book? The old "I'm a scary creature with giant eyeballs" gag. You see, Mr. Owl was really a royal moth, an insect that uses its large wing spots to mimic a much more frightening animal. One once scared the dirt out of me. And those fireflies, which really weren't fireflies at all, but beetles, were using a cold chemical process to produce light and attract potential mates. Beautiful, yes, but if anyone thinks they're magical, I've got some hardpan in Florida to sell them. Soon our maiden was confronted by the sight that saddened her deeply. An immense tree, as old as the forest itself, was lying on the ground. "Oh, I'm so sorry," said Harriet, touching the fallen tree. "Such a tragedy, such a waste. Oh, you poor, beautiful tree." Well, truthfully, the tree's fate was a far cry from being a waste. These huge nurse trees, as their name implies, are the key word to new growth and the survival of the entire forest. In fact, a fallen tree is arguably more alive than a standing one, so much of their mass is taken up with because much of their mass is taken up with other organisms. As a famous worm once wrote, "I think I shall never see a poem as lovely as a big, rotting tree carcass." Harriet was suddenly surprised to come across a little baby bird lying helplessly on the ground. She gently scooped up the little creature and searched for the nest in the highest reaches of a nearby tree. "Poor little guy," she cooed. "Did you fall out of your home? Well, I'll just put you right back where you belong." Climbing the tree, Harriet perched into the nest. "There you go," she said, placing the trembling baby bird alongside its sibling. "You two youngsters are together again." But not for long. As soon as Harriet was gone, the fledgling found itself plummeting back to earth. You see, She had rescued a baby golden eagle, a species in which the strongest sibling ensures its survival by giving its younger brothers and sisters the old heave-ho. Author's note: this behavior always takes place in the absence of the parents, which would come as no surprise to the younger siblings of all the other species. It's a true story. Yeah, some birds kick their siblings out, to their death, or hoping they'll die so they can survive. So sad. Be nice to your siblings. Scrambling up the tree, Harriet's view was marred by the sight of a forest fire raging out of control, but fortunately moving away from her. Oh, the suffering! Oh, the loss of life, she lamented. Someone should try and put it out! Someone should just mind their own business from nature's point of view. Big, healthy trees don't burn easily unless the flames are stoked with a lot of fallen branches and debris. Occasional fires, if certain two-legged vertebrates would just let them run their course, benefit the forest by keeping all that dangerous kindling from piling up. But boy, if it does pile up, whoosh, watch your anterior end. But Harriet's spirits didn't stay dampened for long. She decided it was time to return home. As she hummed a cheery tune, she reflected on how lucky she was to live in the forest and be so close to nature. Oh, the things she had seen. But then, without warning, Harriet came across something she didn't want to see.